Welcome back to the Links Golf Podcast. This season of the podcast is presented by FootJoy. And speaking of things being presented by FootJoy, the Links 100 has just been released. Our new ranking of the world's top 100 golf courses. And joining me today is our editor at Links, George Pepper, and contributing writer, administrator of the list, Joe Passoff. The keepers of the keys, if you will, these two guys that are joining us today. Um, we want to get right into it. For anyone who's interested in learning more about the Links 100, how we came up with it, how it was scored, you can visit our website, and we have supporting articles around the list, but we'll give you a little bit more background here today on this episode. So thanks, George, for being with me and Joe today. What is the Links 100, and how did it come to fruition?
Well, I'm delighted. We're kind of finally doing it. We've been around for what, 25, 30 years now. And as we say in the article, who more logically to do a listing of the world's greatest golf courses than the magazine who makes it its business to pay attention to these golf courses? Rankings go back. I think the first one, the first consistent regular ranking, there was one back in the 30s, but it was 1968, I believe. Golf Digest came out. They did the 200 toughest golf courses in the world. And I was at Golf Magazine about a decade later, and golf still hadn't come out with a competitor, which was mind-boggling to me. And I remember having a meeting in my office with Rhys Jones, son of architect Robert Trent Jones, and a great architect in his own right, even back then, and this was 1978. He came in with a guy named Paul McDonald, he might have been the president of Dunlop at the time. And he said, you guys need to get in this game. And we did in 1979, and we went in a totally different, they were doing, at that time, Golf Digest was doing the 100 best courses in America. They changed from the 200 toughest. And we decided to go the other way. We did the 50 best, fewer, in the world, more exclusive. And instead of going according to very strict criteria with a big panel, as Golf Digest did, we had a relatively small panel of kind of household name authorities in the game. And we didn't give them really any criteria. We just asked them each to do their own definition of what best or great is. And we therefore had 50, 60, however many panels we had, different subjective views, and we took an objective average of them. And one kind of interesting, funny story from that first tabulation, I did it myself, and we had all the votes back. And when they were all counted, I was astonished to see we had a dead heat for first place. I mean, tied out to the last decimal point. We did it on a grade point average, as we do with the Lynx 100. It was 5 points for an A, which meant top 10 in the world, 4 points for B, which was top 50, three for C, top 100, D for top 200, 2 points, and 1 point for it doesn't belong on the ballot. Okay, so when they were all tabulated, there was a tie between Pine Valley and Muirfield at 4.28 or whatever the number was. And I said, well, we can't have this because we already have a cover line that says the best course in the world with, buy the magazine and find out what it is. We can't have two best courses in the world. So, I did the only sensible thing. I cheated and changed my own ballot, which up to that point, I'd given A's to both Pine Valley and Muirfield. And I just, well, we can't have the best courses in the world have an American at the top. So I demoted Pine Valley to a B, therefore putting Muirfield in first place. And we went to the cover with a photograph of Muirfield. Now, I'm not proud of having done that, even whatever, how many it is, 40 odd years later. But I will say, I think it's the only instance of chicanery or vote tampering that went on, at least in my 20 years of running the Golf Magazine list. And I know that we have a similarly honest list with the Lynx 100 because, well, for one thing, there are no advertisers grinding axes. There are no political influences. There are just hundreds of golf course architects grinding their own personal axes, each against each other. And I think that's a pretty way of keeping things accurate and authoritative.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, specifically the only people who voted on the Lynx 100 on this ballot, which is why it makes our list distinctive, is it was only golf architects from members of the ASGCA, the American Society of Golf Course Architects, the EIGCA, the European Institute of Golf Course Architects, and the SAGCA, the Society of Australian Golf Course Architects. So a wide net was cast. We had the ballot of about 400 courses and distributed that to the societies. They voted. And for anyone who hasn't seen the list, it starts at the top with a course that hasn't been at the top of most lists recently, and that's Cypress Point, um, nudging ahead of Pine Valley on the Lynx 100 as the top course in the world. Uh, Joe, can you introduce a little bit about the criteria that we wanted to use in the architects? And the the grading scale was rather, simple in terms of what we were asking them, how we were asking them to vote, but the other things that were in consideration for how you should come to your number that you were giving a particular course.
Yeah, sure, Al. I mean, I've been involved in different rankings, by my count, six different rankings that involve ranking the world's best courses or something close to that. And when it was time to figure out how to best bring this about, and we decided that it was going to be the architects voting this time. And again, as you pointed out, not all architects, but architects that belong to the three largest societies, professional groups on the planet. So, what's been characteristic these last 4 or 5 years coming out of the pandemic is that architects are busy, maybe busier than ever. Not as many brand new courses as, right around the 1990s leading into the 2000s, but with renovation projects, restorations of every kind, and they're happening all over because more people started playing. You had more clubs that had more money, more funds, and could realize their ambitions to improve their golf courses. What does that all mean for the Lynx 100? It means the architects are busier than ever. So, to account for that fact, we created a scoring system you alluded to that would be as simple as possible. It was honestly designed to say, Mr. or Ms. Architect, we understand you're very busy, but I think this is a fun exercise. And if we keep it simple and fun for you, you'll do it. And give us your opinions, and we can count your votes and see where it all leads to. So we devised a 1 through 5 scoring system. Okay. Really couldn't get much simpler. 5 is the highest score that you could award for a golf course. And after that, it went down in increments of half points. So the very truly elite would get a score of 5. That might just be a handful, might just be one, but it could be 3, 4, 6, whatever number you designate. And then after that, whatever you felt like a course deserved based on you playing or walking it so that you were comfortable enough with evaluating it. It could be a 4, a 3.5, a 2, a 1.5, right down to a 1. I mean, there weren't going to be a whole lot of ones given or 1.5s because all of the courses, all 400 that were on the ballot, are pretty worthy. I mean, we're basically saying to the architects, here is the consensus from all the other people that do rankings of the current 400 best golf courses out there. So let us know which ones you've played and walked and how you rank it. Now, you're probably going to ask, did we impose some criteria for them to evaluate in different categories? Al, were you going to ask that?
Yeah, the factors that we asked them to weigh in on when coming up with their vote. What were those? What examples of some of those things?
Yeah, and so we had no formal guidelines. These are the world's architects, the society architects. They don't need an editorial staff to tell them how to evaluate a golf course. Okay, so for simple guidelines, almost as a refresher, we could ask them, hey, why don't you consider how well does the course test the full range of skills, the flow and balance of the course, meaning design rhythm, the variety. It almost goes without saying, the greatest courses have superior variety, both the terrain that you encounter and then the individual holes, the skill of routing, the navigability of how you get around. Architects love that, admire that. That's the hardest thing to do well on a given property is get the best routing out of it. So they're all going to look at how well the course was routed. After that, you throw in what most of us think about: beauty, setting, course conditioning has a lot to do with it. And then finally, how did the architects that designed the course use that given land? Was it lousy land to start and they did an amazing job with it? Was it great land to start and they were admirably restrained in figuring out how to get the most out of it? So that's really how it unfolded. That's what we gave to them and said, let us know what you think.
A couple other things I'll mention in there. Um, we did ask the architects to refrain from voting on their own designs. So anything they were involved with, they were not to vote for. We also had some bonus points awarded for anyone who had been to a given course in the last 5 years. So seeing that course in its most recent form versus someone who maybe 20 years ago saw the course uh, offered a little bit more of a bonus in their vote. And that's how we got to our ranking. And as I mentioned, Cypress Point was number one. So, George, Joe, why do you think Cypress is at the top of this list?
Well, just spoke to that. I mean, just the sheer beauty of the place. I've always said there's no better place to play badly than Cypress Point, because you can just enjoy the walk, and it doesn't beat you up. It's in contrast to Pine Valley, you can hit the ball offline there fairly often and not be out of a hole. At Pine Valley, you can't get away with that. Although, to Pine Valley's credit, it is far more forgiving and open than it looks off the tee. It's just very intimidating looking. But again, just to stand on almost any tee at Cypress Point is a joy to be alive.
It's so funny, Al, George, how you can look at the eras, these golf courses emerged from. And you looked at Pine Valley. George Crump, the man who designed it, was an excellent player himself, a scratch amateur. And he had some very good assistants that helped advise and then completed the course after his death. And he really wanted to be the ultimate test, just in the way C.B. Macdonald had designed National Golf Links as a collection of all-star holes with influences from the British Isles. Pine Valley was meant to be every hole should inspire greatness, grandeur, and the rest of it. And it's not for the weak-hearted. Um, George is right. Can you imagine what Pine Valley must have been like in the first 10 years of its existence when players were using hickory shafts and not flying the ball any more than 200 yards, running it with carry 250 or so? Just what an absolute monster that golf course would have been. Today the fairways are still plenty wide. A lot of the tree coverage has been cleared out, but what it hits you with all the newfangled equipment is that it does possess the greatest number of first class memorable holes of any course that you encounter. Okay, so why did Cypress Point come ahead of it? Well, after George started the Golf Magazine rankings, I helped out with their rankings for 13 years. And in all the years that we published the World Top 100 rankings, when I was there, Pine Valley finished number one and Cypress Point finished number two. Every single one that we put out, it was the same. A lot of other cool changes and courses went up and down, but Cypress Point was always there. It was always top two as far as that goes. And I think where we've come, and I'm kind of speaking generally on behalf of the architects, but to touch on what George said, Pine Valley, I mean, you absolutely have to be on your toes and playing well enough to get the full appreciation. Cypress Point has magnificent architecture of its own. Yes, and strategy. And when the wind blows, this can be as, top 20 in the country in terms of difficulty. But what separates Cypress Point is the joy factor. It just doesn't get any better. You think about beauty on a golf course. I remember in my Golf Digest days, I was being asked to rank a course 1 to 10 with beauty. I'm like, how do you do that with Cypress Point? That deserves a 17. So I think that's where Cypress gets the edge, is that in this day and age, where every college kid, self-respecting worth his salt, can bomb at 340 out there, there has to be a differentiator or two for the entire class of players who play. And I just don't think the golf course has any peer in that regard, as far as where do I want to wake up and then play my perhaps last round of golf at Cypress Point.
So when you're looking at the list, for easier reading for the person viewing the list, we decided to multiply the final rating. So you had that scale 1 to 5. We multiplied that by 10 and rounded to the nearest hundredth. So that's when you're looking at the list, that's where you jump from the scale of 1 to 5 to what scores you see on the Links 100. And Cypress Point's score was a 48 compared to Pine Valley 47.58. So it's not like there's, one of them lapped the other one by a wide margin. In fact, they're the only two on the list that rank 47 or greater. You jump more than a whole point to number 3, and that's Royal County down at 46.36. Rounding out the top 10, just rifle these off. Number 4, National Golf Links of America. Number 5, the Old Course at St. Andrews. 6, Shinnecock Hills. 7, Sand Hills in Nebraska. 8, Royal Melbourne West. 9, Royal Portrush, the Dunless course. And 10, Royal Dornick Championship. So that is your top 10. What other big takeaways did either of you guys have when looking at the final results?
An interesting initial, what you just read off there, 10 courses, 5 of them are outside the US and 5 of them are inside. And if you go down to the top 20, I think it's 11 and 9. And it's really a pretty even split between courses outside the US and US based courses. I guess the one thing that we talked about in the office when these came in, and I suppose others will be surprised, is they haven't heard yet the name Pebble Beach. And that's a course that has traditionally been in just about everybody's top 10 or thereabouts. And in our list, it comes in at 15th. And I'd be interested in Joe's take on that because he's much more into this than we are.
Yeah, it's very interesting. From the time that I first started really paying attention to rankings, and I mean, I did. I love the whole topic. When I first got introduced to them in the 1970s, and what used to be two automatics, I mean, in my mind, even for the world list, to be in the top 10 were Augusta National and Pebble Beach. I mean, it just the kind of courses that went right off the top of your head, off the tip of your tongue, you just knew those two would be part of the top 10. Oftentimes part of the top 5. And I think in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you've had such a proliferation of architecture stuff, websites, and video, and the world has gotten so much smaller. Conversations have gotten so much broader and more intense, debating the relative merits of course to course to course. And the courses that do get seen a lot get nitpicked over by everybody at the table. So, for better or worse, Pebble Beach and Augusta National are on television every year, and we write preview stories and review stories about them. And, everybody weighs in. You want to get noticed by saying something, a hot take, a little controversial. And I think in some respects, both those courses suffer a little bit from that. They both easily made the top 15, but maybe why not the top 10? Maybe a little over scrutiny on the part of some pretty harsh critics out there.
Yeah, I guess very few people are being enraptured by Augusta National or Pebble Beach for the first time. And it's not as if in our list they've been displaced or moved down the list by modern courses. I'm looking at the list now. In the top 10, there's only one golf course that is newer than 1931, I think, and that's Sandhills, 1994. Everything else dates back before we were all born. So, I think your explanation is as good as any, Joe.
You also talked
Al,
about,
the other,
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say you also talked about Joe or GP the spread between U.S. and the world, and maybe that's where we get some differentiation too is having these world architecture societies involved. You get 11 courses in Australia on this list and 4 in New Zealand as part of this list. Um, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, you talk about the courses that everyone gets to see all the time in America versus maybe Australia. There are more lesser knowns that are deserving of this placement.
Yeah, I'll put in my 2 cents and then let Joe spend the big money. Uh, I think it's a good thing. I think it's educational. I think it's one of the things that links should do is as good a job as we can to introduce our readers to courses they might not otherwise take a look at. And although I don't think we foresaw it as a consequence of including the architects, by including the Australian architects, it has been a byproduct, a greater emphasis. Those guys are obviously very proud of the courses in their country. And I am going to be the last one to suggest that the last of the Australian golf courses on our list does not belong there. I bet it does. It just has not gotten the exposure and eyeballs that so many American and European courses have.
Yeah, Al, I think again with more than 30 years for me of doing this sort of stuff and participating as a panelist, uh, most lists are pretty much as good as the people who voted on them. And each of the major lists, the publications that would come out with a list, there were always issues that one could take with the makeup of the panel. So I don't have to go into specifics, but yeah, there are limitations no matter what. If you get 10,000 people voting, well, it dilutes everything because there's not enough experts in that. If you get 12 or 30 people sitting in a room and pick them, well, again, I mean, maybe there's too much of a group think that results and not enough room for differentiation. Okay. So in the case of the architects, clearly, I would say when you guys find some free time and you women as well, go to Asia and refresh yourselves on some of the great golf courses in Japan and Korea and some new ones built in China and so forth. I mean, that was one of the things that just stuck out to me was not that there was any negativity towards those courses. There just wasn't enough participation in having seen them. You can understand that perhaps. It's not the easiest thing always to get to Asia and make your way around the golf courses. And some of the voting blocks that we see with other outlets tend to do that better than others. By the same token, I'm going to go back to just what George said. Australia is even further away for many people, and so is New Zealand. So to have some representation and then ultimately some illumination on some of the so-called second-tier courses that everybody understands Royal Melbourne, is one of the world's greats. Greg Norman and Ben Crenshaw and many others have lauded it for all this time. Different people used to rank the composite course at Royal Melbourne as the single best course in the world. We don't rank the composite because it switches around too much. We rank the west and the east at Royal Melbourne. Kingston Heath has really come up in recent years as more and more people have come to understand what a great feat of architecture that was. Gil Hans told me that it's the best job he's ever seen of a small, modest property, architects getting the maximum out of it. So, kudos to those at the top. But much more interesting to me are how well the rest of the Australian and New Zealand courses fared, including ones not all that many people were terribly familiar with. One of them that stands out completely for me, and I hope to get educated over the years, is, well, it's called Peninsula Kingswood, the North Course. And the name comes from a merger of two clubs, sometime, I believe, in the last 2 decades, and an architectural collaboration from a firm that actually no longer exists, OCCM, but Mike Cocking, the lead architect, doing most of the work there. And I think that's one of the fun parts of any top 100 list is when you get a surprise, even to veteran observers like us, and say, wow, there are enough architects, both local, regional architects, and then others that happen to stop by that said, yeah, this hasn't hosted any big tournaments, but the work is simply too good to ignore. Give it a high number, and it finished in the Links top 100. So congrats all the way around.
Yeah, that one caught my eye too. I'd never heard of it. And I think noteworthy is the fact that it was not the lowest ranking among the Australia New Zealand courses on our top 100. Right behind it was Paraparaumu Beach, which has been around for as long as top 100 ratings have. And Corey Cliffs was beneath it also. And most of our readers know Corey Cliffs for its breathtaking beauty.
Al, I was also heartened by the fact that there were 31 golf courses selected from Great Britain and Ireland. Um, a lot of those links courses, classic links, weren't exactly manufactured by architects, which are most of what today's architects are paid to do. They were subtly sculpted on the land, and then some good variety in terms of the hazard value and green design and so forth. But it amused me. I can't say I was shocked, but how much respect the World Society architects had for the tried and true classics where much of the game is played along the ground and the game switches daily depending on the wind. And you had your usual share of old reliables, but there were others that popped in. I'm going to say, I got to look at the list. One of them, I think Western Gales was on there. Royal Porthcawl in Wales was on there. Courses like that don't always make top 100s. And yet we inevitably come away saying, boy, that was a good round. That was some real golf. And sure, I would go back in a minute, kind of thing. So I think the preference, and there were other preferences, but the preference for just classic links golf in its various iterations and sand-based golf, even the inland courses that did well, was heartening for me personally.
So last thing I want to touch here on, and Joe, you're going to be doing some digital editorial around this list throughout the year, kind of highlighting some things and maybe what to watch for. So in that respect, we did see only two courses built since 2020 uh, crack the entire top 100, and that was St. Patrick's Links in Ireland at Rosapena, and then Hoi An Shores in Vietnam. Tom Doak's Terra Iti is the only course in the top 20 built since 2000. Only 17 courses since 2000 were a part of the entire list. Um, Someone looking at this list probably, wants to know about uh, a course like the Lido that's gotten a lot of attention. Just what does it say in general about George? You're talking about the earlier at the top 10 and only one course, um, built in the modern era in there. But overall, the reverence for older classic golf courses is quite evident. But what do you think the whole list, kind of says in that regard? Exactly what I just said.
Joe, I defer to you on that one.
Oh, well, all right, George. You've earned the deferment. Um, yeah, Al, ultimately, you made a good point. We omitted certain very recent designs from the ballot entirely. Okay. That was something I thought about from my earliest days in the Golf Digest ranking panel, where they asked for a golf course to be open, I believe, at least a year before it could be considered for top 100 purposes. That was back in the day when we call it now recency bias, but also a certain amount of, hysteria, basically. When a new course opened and holy cow, it's the greatest thing since the last one, and overreactions really that accompanied so many brand new courses. And wouldn't it be more sensible to let them settle a little bit, let them mature before we reserve full judgment on them? Well, in this day and age of all the news has to be instantaneous, we need it now. Get it first before it's even right. All of that. No, the reason that we omitted those courses for this go round is because we felt it would be unfair to, for instance, in the case of Alito, in Wisconsin, for the European architects and the Australian architects to have been charged with the responsibility of seeing the new courses, in such a short time period. So because we involved the three societies, even though they have different numbers of members, they were treated all as equals. And whether a new course opened in Europe or down under or in North America, you know what? Let's wait for the next time and let it season a little bit, give some of the publicity a chance to take hold. And for the traveling architects who want to make a special trip and go see it, they'll have that opportunity then.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. When we started the Golf Magazine list, shortly after we started it, a very, very young Tom Doak took over the tabulation of the voting. And he did it for, whether it was 10 years or close to 20, but quite a long time until one day he came up to me. He said, I have to recuse myself because I think one of my courses may be a candidate for the top 100. And it turned out to be Pacific Dunes. That's an aside. But his point was that it takes three sort of votings for a new course to get its accurate due. Because in the first voting, the first people who see it are invariably the architect, developer, and their friends, family, buddies, however many of whom might also be panelists. And so invariably that's skewed in an overly positive way. And the second voting normally spurs the interest of somewhat of a backlash among the people who felt that, oh, this course can't be that good, or I don't like the people involved in that course. So there's the other group that comes in and votes it probably that group too negatively. And so it takes really three passes at a new course for the reasonable people to get in there and take a truly objective look at it and make an unbiased assessment and vote and let things settle out. So just another way of saying, yeah, it takes some seasoning, and to wait a while is not a bad thing at all.
Well, we'll see what happens in the next go around. Obviously, there could be some new names on the list. There were some that are right there in the next 10 that missed being on the list by hundredths of a point. Some newer designs, Cabot Highlands, the Castle Stewart course, Sand Valley. Those are in that uh, modern category. You've got a course like Yale that was at 108 on our list, and after restoration, there you could see some differences in voting that gets it onto the list as well. Um, all remains to be seen, but hopefully the list is educational, like you guys both mentioned. There were courses that you didn't even know of that were on the list. So it was educational for your purposes. I'm sure it is for others reading as well. If nothing else, it's entertaining and sure to cause some debate. I've already seen some chatter out there that mostly people that are disagreeing with whatever is on there, which is inherently what happens. But um, I don't think that biases were crept into this list in the way they might in other lists. So um, we're very proud of it and proud, happy that the societies were working with us on this. Um, I think it turned out a great. Any last parting thoughts from you guys on the Lynx 100?
I just say that, no list is definitive, but a good list is defensible, and we have a good list.
Yeah, Al, I think something I said a little while back. Uh, you think about the architects, and you can question whether they can be fair about evaluating their fellow designers. But I also look at it, and we did ultimately we came to that decision is to say who better to judge the comparative merits of golf courses than the men and women who design them for a living. They know best of all what needed to be done, what was done, what's the final result. And, I think even with whatever surprises our list contains, it also reaffirmed many of our judgments and, shines very, very favorable light on how the architects think and what they value in great golf course design.
So again, visit lynxmagazine.com. The Lynx 100 is there, right on the top menu. You can click and view the rankings, make your own assessments, read Joe's piece of edit that also includes a letter from the three societies, the presidents of each society, on their perspective on rankings, which I thought was also quite interesting. George, Joe, thanks for the conversation today, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about it. But until next time.
Okay, thanks, Al.
Good to be with you.